Good morning. It's great to be with you online this morning. My name is Helen and I'm the Family and Children's Team Leader here at St Thomas Crooks. I hope that you are enjoying the weekend so far. For us in our house, we have been celebrating Max finishing his A-levels and leaving school for good. And that has involved eating a large amount of fantastic food. But today, it's lovely to be here and to be able to share from the Bible with you. We're back in our series looking at living under restrictions, continuing our journey through the book of Exodus. And today, it's chapter 16, verses 21 to 30. But before we read that together, just a little recap for us. So the Israelites have been freed from slavery for about 2 months. But rather than reveling and rejoicing in their newfound freedom, they're grumbling and moaning about not having enough food to eat. And in fact, they're saying that it would be better, that they would prefer to go back to Egypt to die surrounded by potted meat. And if you don't believe me, you can check out chapter 16, verse 3, because potted meat was clearly the food trend of the day in ancient Egypt. But God took pity on these moaning Israelites, and he miraculously provided quail every evening and bread, manna, every morning for them to eat. And he said that they were to gather it each day, but not to store any overnight, because otherwise it would become infested with maggots. And so this was the pattern or the rhythm that the Israelites were to follow for 5 days of the week. But today's passage tells us what God said would happen on days 6 and 7. So let's read that together now. Exodus chapter 16. Verses 21 to 30. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning." So they saved it until morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. "Eat it today," Moses said, "because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any." Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather it, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out." So the people rested on the 7th day. Now, I wonder what your first thoughts were when you heard that passage. Perhaps maybe this: amazing! Sabbath, a day of rest. Oh, this is so good because I am in real need of some rest and relaxation after this last week, the past month. No, to be honest, just this entire year. I am totally up for a sermon that encourages us to get some me time. Or maybe this one. Great. A sermon about Sabbath. Obviously the Israelites can take a day of rest because they are literally just wandering around a desert. They're not juggling a full-time job, a mortgage, 3 kids, a global pandemic, and trying to have a social life. They don't actually even have to go shopping for food, for goodness sake. This is irrelevant to my life. Or finally, maybe this description. Oh no, a sermon about Sabbath. I mean, I know I should be doing it. I've heard loads of people are taking a Sabbath day now. They all bought this book about hurrying, and I bought the book. I've tried to do it. It's really hard, but I haven't even read it, let alone take a day of rest. This is just going to be a guilt trip of a sermon for me. So I don't know if any of those slightly caricatured responses resonate with you. But I know that at different times in my life, I have related to each one of them. Sabbath is all about a day of not working. Sabbath is irrelevant for 21st century Christians. Oh no, actually maybe it is relevant, but it's just designed to make us feel guilty. And so with that in mind, you might think that the obvious way to go with this sermon would be to look at each of those responses, unpack them, and then to link it back to Exodus 16. But actually, this morning, I'd like us to do something a little different. And we're going to look at 3 things, or 3 words. And they are gift, relationship, and trust. Let's start with gift. Now, gifts are a big deal for me. I love buying gifts. I love receiving gifts. Gifts are my primary love language. They are the way that I feel loved and also express love. Alan, however, does not love gifts. He really doesn't get how a gift could make someone feel loved, and he really does not like buying gifts. Bearing this in mind, I think it's fair to describe the first few years of our marriage as dark days when it came to gift giving on both of our parts. Alan tried hard, but bought some really bad gifts. And I received these gifts in an incredibly poor and ungrateful way. And I was heard to utter things such as, "What on earth am I meant to do with this? I really don't want it. And did you actually think that I was going to like this?" I had no appreciation for the gifts that were given to me. And this is also one of the key stumbling blocks when it comes to the Sabbath. Because we forget that it is God's gift to us, and that God only ever gives gifts that are good. And because we have no appreciation for this gift that God is trying to gift us, we say things like, "What on earth am I meant to do with this? I really don't want it." However, the Bible is pretty clear. The Sabbath is a gift to be received. If we look at today's passage, in verse 29, Moses says to the people, "The Lord has given you the Sabbath." But what else does the Bible say? Well, Isaiah 56, Ezekiel chapter 20, God describes the Sabbath as my holy day. And in Mark chapter 2, Jesus says that the Sabbath is made for us. In Genesis chapter 2 and Exodus chapter 30, we read that God made the Sabbath day holy and he blessed it. So the Sabbath is a day in our week, God's day, a blessed and holy day gifted to us. Great! But isn't that a bit of a strange present? Last year, on my birthday, Alan bought me the handbag that I have always wanted, but never, ever would buy for myself. When I unwrapped it, it is fair to say that it was not a dark day for gifts. I love it. I use it all the time. It's just over here, but you can't see it. It's beautiful. But how could I possibly have the same feeling or response to a day? Well, Isaiah 56 says that those who keep a Sabbath day will experience God's blessing and will be gathered and drawn closer to him. They will experience greater holiness and connection to their Heavenly Father. And chapter 58 says that if we call the Sabbath a delight, if we honour this day, then we will find joy in the Lord. And so the joy and the delight that we will experience from accepting this gift of the Sabbath is far greater than my happiness at unwrapping the handbag of dreams. So this all sounds amazing, a gift of a day, once a week, through which we'll be blessed and experience a closer relationship with God. So brilliant. Why aren't we then receiving this gift with open arms? What's going on here? I think the issue is that we don't see this day as God's day. We see it as our day. And we view the concept of Sabbath not as a gift, but as a restriction upon what we want to do with our time. Rather than recognizing Sabbath as God's holy day gifted to us, we see it as our 24-hour holiday being taken away from us. Rather than receiving the gift with appreciation and gratitude, we say, "Did you really think that I would like this, God?" Because on our mini holiday from the rest of the week, we want to get up late, eat great food, play sport, kick back, relax, watch a film, go for a walk. Because it's our day to do with as we please. Now, please don't get me wrong. All of those things are great ways to rest and to get relaxation. But they're also exactly the same type of thing that people who are not followers of Jesus do at the weekend. And that's not what Sabbath is about. Sabbath is a holy day. Its purpose is to be a spiritual delight, to bring us heavenly joy and blessing from God, a day to draw closer in our relationship with him. And it's also designed to set us apart and to show that we are different. And that's where we come to those two other words that I mentioned at the beginning: relationship and trust. God didn't gift us the Sabbath because he was really keen to make sure that we had a day in our week that was all about legalistic rules. God gifted us the Sabbath because he was really keen that there would be a day in our week where we remembered our covenant relationship with him. We first hear about Sabbath in Genesis chapter 2. God finished the work of creation and he rested. And Adam and Eve were with him and he was with them in this perfect, unspoiled relationship in the Garden of Eden. And God's plan is that one day we will experience that same closeness and rest that comes from being in the presence of God every day. But this time it will be in the garden city that we read about in Revelation 21 and 22. And the Sabbath will be never ending. But whilst we're waiting for this, we're called to take one day per week to remember that first Sabbath and to remember the promise of the Sabbath in the future. But both of them illustrating a time where there's a perfect, complete connection and relationship between man and God. Now, the second relational aspect of Sabbath can be seen in Deuteronomy chapter 5, where God gives Moses the 10 Commandments. And here God says, the Israelites are to keep the Sabbath, to remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Keeping one day per week holy would help the Israelites to remember that they had been rescued by God, that they had been released from slavery, that God had saved them from the clutches of Pharaoh and his army, and that they had been set free. And that's why Christians mark Sunday or keep Sunday as a holy day. It's the day when we remember that Jesus did the same for us. On the 6th day of the week, on the cross, Jesus finished the work that he had been sent to earth to complete. The Sabbath followed, and he rested in the tomb. But then on Sunday, Jesus rose to life again. Through his death and resurrection, we have been saved, rescued from the sin that enslaves us. Jesus sets us free. And so the Sabbath has always been about the covenant relationship between man and God. And therefore, the words that we read in the Old Testament still apply to us today. Exodus 31, this will be a sign between me and you, so that you may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy. Celebrate it for years to come as a lasting covenant. Or Ezekiel chapter 20, keep my Sabbaths holy, that they may be a sign between us. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. Now, I think there's a link here between gift and relationship. A couple of Christmases ago, Alan gave me a new camera. Now, obviously, I'm making sure that you really do know that the dark days are gone. But imagine if I left the camera in a box or in a cupboard. I never used it, never took it out, never took it on holiday. That is not a great sign that I'm giving to Alan. It would probably cause some hurt and damage in our relationship. Using the camera, using the gift, is a way of demonstrating to Alan that I value him and the things that he gives me. It's a way that I can honour and bless him. And every time I use the camera, I remember, oh, Alan gave this to me. And it reminds me of his love and kindness and generosity towards me. Using the gift deepens the relationship. Observing a Sabbath day is a sign. It's a demonstration that our relationship with God is our number one priority. We're called to keep one day holy, to mark it as different, to show that God is the Lord of our lives, that he comes before all others. It is a day to deepen our relationship with him. So again, this all sounds great. So why is it so hard to do? And the answer is because we're just like the Israelites. In today's Bible passage, only 2 months after being set freed from slavery, 8 weeks into their new life. The Israelites thought it would be better to go back to Egypt, to go back to their old life with the potted meat. They didn't want to take a day to remember that God had rescued them. In Egypt, they were slaves to Pharaoh, constantly making bricks to satisfy his demands and to prove their value and their worth. In the desert, Pharaoh was no longer on the throne, but neither was God. Instead, the Israelites had become slaves to their own desires, constantly needing to work to prove that they could provide for themselves and satisfy their appetites. They didn't want to take a day to remember that it was God who had met and continued to meet all their needs. And we do the same. We become slaves to our work rather than keep a day holy. Checking our emails, marking that pile of school books, writing that report. These things become our priority. We might not live in fear of Pharaoh, but instead we live in fear of our boss or in fear of how we're viewed in the workplace. And we're enslaved to a culture that says we just have to work harder and work longer to earn more money, to buy more stuff, to have a bigger house, to get a longer holiday, to accrue a larger pension pot. And if we do all this, then we will be enough and we will have enough. And we will be able to meet all of our needs by ourselves. Or perhaps it's not work, it's the kids. We're slaves to our children and our family time. And so Sunday league football, or rugby, or cricket, or dance, or swimming, or days out with friends, they become the things that can't be missed, can't be changed, can't be dropped, or can't be refused. But giving a day of a week to focus on our relationship with God, well, that can be. Is remembering our covenant relationship with God our number one priority? Or is it what our children want? Does that come first? Have we put our children on the throne of our lives? And that leads us to our last word, trust. Exodus 16, verses 21 to 30, is all about trust. In fact, it's about fear and trust. The Israelites were fearful of starving to death in a desert. The Israelites were fearful of being able to provide for their families. And the Israelites were fearful that if they didn't work, even for just one day, that there wouldn't be enough. And so in verse 21, the Israelites had to trust God that every morning there would be enough food for them. In verse 22, they had to trust that on the morning of the 6th day, there would be enough food for 2 days, and they had to trust that the work that they did on that day would be enough. In verse 23, they have to trust that the food they prepare in the evening won't be maggot infested by the morning. In verses 26 and 27, they have to trust that after the Sabbath, the bread will be there again the next week. In verse 28 and 29, they have to trust God with their time. Sabbath is all about replacing fear with trust. When we became parents, we made the decision that Sunday would be set apart for God. And we would go to church together every week as a family, because we wanted to model to our children that investing in a relationship with God was our number one priority. The reality of this is that none of our children were allowed to accept birthday party invitations from friends if it meant that they couldn't come to church. We were fearful And our kids were fearful that their friendships would suffer, that they would be rejected or left out in future. And so we had to trust God with our children's friendships, even with their very best friends, because we wanted to show them that a relationship with God is the most important relationship that anyone can ever invest in. But that is so hard when your daughter is crying and weeping and telling you that you are the worst mother in the world and that it is just all so unfair. And then with our boys, they wanted to play Sunday League football, and we said no. And we said no again and again and again. And in fact, we said no until they were in year 9 and they could come to the evening gathering by themselves. The boys were fearful that they would miss out on training and developing their skills, and then they wouldn't be good enough to be selected for a team. And we were fearful that this decision might damage our relationship with them, because believe me, the boys were angry with us for years and years. But we had to trust God with their desire to play football, and we had to trust God that He would protect our relationship with our children. Our testimony is that by accepting the gift of the Sabbath, by making it a non-negotiable part of our weekly rhythm as a family, and by giving God our fears and worries about those 3 lives that are most precious to us. Our testimony is that God is always faithful, that He always keeps His promise, and that He always provides. The Israelites got manna from heaven. In year 9, at the end of his first season of playing Sunday League football, Max got asked to join the Sheffield Wednesday development squad. I don't know what it is for you. Maybe it's not your kids. Maybe it's your time, financial provision, your work. Whatever it is, I would encourage you to accept the gift of the Sabbath and commit to making this part of your weekly rhythm. As we begin to step out from living under restrictions, let's take this opportunity to reprioritize our relationship with God. Take one day in our week to set aside fear and worry, the busyness, the noise, and the pressure of days 1 to 6. Allow God to teach us and to show us that He can be trusted, that He will always provide, and that He is in control. Because it is my firm belief that if we accept God's gift of the Sabbath, if we invest in our relationship with Him, if we learn to trust, then we will find rest for our souls. Let's take some time to pray. Just where you are at home, wherever you're watching this, let's just still our hearts as we come before God.